Everybody's trying to make good games and sell them, but that's obviously not the only stuff that goes on in the video game industry. We see big budget flops, disasters, and fiascos all the time, and 2024 was full of them. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanx, 10 video game things that died in 2024. Starting off with number 10, Game Informer shut down. One of the last remaining gaming magazines finally called it quits this year after being closed suddenly by parent company GameStop. They didn't even give them a chance to put out a final goodbye issue. The magazine was closed effective immediately, making issue 367 their final physical magazine. If you're a younger viewer, it's probably hard to imagine, but video game magazines used to be such an important part of the lives of any gamer. We all had subscriptions to stuff like Nintendo Power and EGM and Game Informer. And for most of us, it was our primary means of getting gaming news and reviews, and stuff like PC Gamer gave us demo discs, and a lot of us played games we wouldn't be able to buy for quite a while that way, and at least understood how good they are and why it was worthwhile to save up the cash to buy them. Of course, with the internet happening, the idea of a gaming magazine, it saw an inevitable decline. It was slow, but inevitable. But Game Informer held out, mostly because they were owned by GameStop, who would sell subscriptions in their stores. I know that's why I was getting Game Informer years past the point where it made any sense to be getting a physical gaming magazine. Even if you weren't subscribed, it was just nice to know the magazine was still going. It was like a rock in the storm, in an industry in turmoil. Game Informer was one thing you could count on, so with it finally gone, it feels like the end of an era. Listen, gaming magazines weren't always the best. A lot of them were just product catalogs pretending to be impartial news sources. Nintendo Power, I'm looking at you. Game Informer was mostly a marketing arm for GameStop, particularly in those final years. And who on earth is buying their news when they can go online and get it for free? And free happens to be much faster. There's a reason all these magazines disappeared, but I can't help but be a little nostalgic for them. And number 9 is platform exclusives. I know I'm putting my credibility in danger with this one, but I'm just going to say it. 2024 is the year where platform exclusivity died. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be totally gone. That would be totally insane for me to say. As long as Nintendo exists, there will be exclusive games, but not even on that basis. There's going to be other exclusives. But I think everybody just got fed up with it this year. I think it's done. I think they don't make as much money doing it. I mean, Astrobot getting Game of the Year just basically pissed everybody off that doesn't own a PlayStation 5. I understand it being a console exclusive, given how Sony related it is, but I mean, it would have made more money if it was out on every platform. Like, I would buy it on PC, not even a question. I hope they release it on PC so I can buy it on PC. I love it on PlayStation 5, but I just prefer playing games on the computer at this point. But one of the more noteworthy examples of it is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The relative success or failure of this game has been a pretty huge talking point. I mean, what does it say when a game that big, that looks that good, is reviewed that well, and is bought, frankly, a pretty fair amount? Enough for Sony to give Final Fantasy VII Rebirth an award for being one of the 3 best-selling games on the PS5 in 2024. That's nothing to shake a stick at, but it did not meet the numbers that Square Enix projected and wanted. Now, there could be a lot of reasons why the game didn't do as well as the previous Final Fantasy VII Remake title, but the thing that the developers have decided is the scapegoat, per se, is exclusivity. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was a PlayStation exclusive, and that's why it didn't sell as much. And that's a common refrain in the industry. AAA is just too big and too expensive to confine to a single console. If these companies want to recoup the cost of game development and make a profit, they need their games on as many platforms as possible. There needs to be no friction in buying their games. The old ideas about exclusives drawing audiences doesn't seem to be working anymore. Like, I get a first-party exclusive much more than a third-party exclusive at this point, but there's just not enough room for that audience to grow. At least that's what a lot of industry types believe. I think the canary in the coal mine is the Xbox in 2024. They shifted their strategy completely away from being a dedicated platform. Remember that ad about how Xbox isn't just a console? It's kind of been a weird and worrying year for Xbox, because in some ways, that ad seems kind of correct. I think too early to put a nail in the Xbox coffin. In fact, it could end up being that this is all a bunch of worrywart stuff that was unnecessary. I don't know. But whatever the strategy ends up being, it's definitely not exclusivity. Like, do I think that Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be on the PlayStation platform? Yes, I do. It would be incredibly stupid for them to limit it to Xbox when they are by far the least selling console behind the Switch and the PS5. Switch 2 is coming too, and that's, just going to make exclusivity look stupider for Microsoft at least. And that's a pretty big ouchie when you buy Bethesda in order to restrict big Bethesda titles to your platform, and looking at it, it doesn't really look like that great of an idea anymore. But like, Sony's a little less vocal about this, but they're being a little more flexible than they have been in the past. Who would have thought you'd see Horizon on a Nintendo console? I mean, it's not necessarily full-ass Horizon, it's a Lego game, but still. We'll see exclusives in the future, but it just, as a primary strategy for anybody but Nintendo, I think we'll see a lot less of it going forward, because it's just not going to make the same financial sense it once did. And number 8, Microsoft closes the Xbox Live Marketplace. This was a little bit less of an unexpected thing. The Xbox 360 did define the 7th generation of consoles, and one of the key reasons was the Xbox Live Marketplace. It wasn't the first online console storefront, but for a lot of people, it was their first introduction to buying digital games. And yes, having Xbox bucks and having to buy them, that was all pain in the ass. The UI wasn't the best, but there were a lot of good games on the marketplace, and a lot of them were exclusive, in the era where that mattered a lot more. Looking at the list of games, most of the significant ones can still be played on the Xbox One and beyond, but there are still some noteworthy titles lost to time, and that's going to always suck. The marketplace was officially closed on July 29th, marking the end of an era for Xbox as a whole, and it's sad to see it go. The one positive I can say is, at least it makes it so old Xbox 360s start up faster. That's nice, but it's always a drag when online stores shut down. At least this one lasted longer than the PlayStation 3 support, and they gave a decent amount of warning before pulling the plug. But also, it wasn't the only online storefront to end. Like, online for both the Nintendo 3DS and the Wii U ended last year, and both of those are much more devastating closures from a game preservation perspective, but the Xbox Marketplace shutdown's pretty significant. It's an end of an era. Ignoring the whole red ring of death thing, the 7th generation was a hell of a time for Xbox fans, so let's stick to remembering the good times rather than mourning what we lost, because seriously, those last few years the Marketplace was barely usable anyways. And number 7, Blizzard's big survival game 6 years in the making was canceled. 2024 was volatile. It was an uncertain year for the games industry. You'd think a studio as old and venerable as Blizzard would be able to weather almost anything. And yeah, I mean, they're not closing. But it's another example of how risky the entire landscape is looking right now. The dead game in question is Odyssey, a survival game that was meant to be Blizzard's answer to Minecraft. On paper, great idea. I mean, any kind of proper competitor to Minecraft from a major studio is interesting, if nothing else. It's a market the AAA games industry hasn't even attempted to crack, well, other than this game, and it was canned before anybody got to really see it. This one's probably more of a casualty of the Microsoft and Activision merger than anything else. Another byproduct of the mass layoffs that hit Blizzard in January of 2024. The total layoffs across the Microsoft gaming division was catastrophic. I'm talking 1,900 people here. That's a lot of jobs, and Blizzard was not spared. They didn't just lose low-level guys during the reorganization either. Major figures in Blizzard, like President Mike Ybarra and their chief design officer, got the boot too. Blizzard's got a long history of games they were working on that eventually got canceled. StarCraft, Ghost, for instance. But Odyssey seemed like it was actually going to happen. Sure, it was suffering through internal issues related to the engine, but at least according to this Bloomberg article, it seemed like they were hopeful about the Microsoft acquisition and seemed to think that it would get development back on track. Instead, the whole thing went off the rails. Like, who knows how Odyssey would have eventually shaken out. It could have been crap, or it could have revolutionized the entire survival game market. I don't know. And number 6, NFT games are dead. Like, really, really dead. People were saying these things were done in 2023, but 2024 gave us a complete reassurance that NFT is done. The bubble burst, the dream is dead, it's over, baby. Trying to find reliable data on the decline of the entire NFT market is difficult because of all the blatant astroturfing from desperate startups trying to recoup their considerable losses by suckering some new schmuck into, coming along and holding the bag. But even a cursory look at most of these project shows they're abject failures. That's the thing about NFTs. You can see how many have been bought and how many people bought them, and things are not looking so good in the player-owned, play-to-earn future. Like, what value is generated just from playing the game? That's the question. And there isn't an answer, okay? That's why this whole thing fell apart. If you want 100% reliable proof that NFT gaming is done, look at Ubisoft. I mean, this company has never seen a bandwagon to jump on way past the point of everyone else that it didn't want to jump on. In 2024, they released not just one, but two completely forgettable, worthless NFT games. Had the audacity to slap Rayman on one of them. Just shameful. The games suck, nobody cared, even remotely, and they immediately tanked. Making a game itself is risky enough, but throwing a bunch of confusing, player-alienating NFT crap on top of it only makes it harder to find any kind of success. I mean, it's hard enough for companies to stay afloat with microtransactions that are pure profit, but now with NFTs, they have to deal with an entire player-owned ecosystem that could spiral out of control and tank prices or get so expensive that nobody wants to engage. And that's all way too much for the average developer and the average consumer. They don't want to jump through a dozen hoops to just get the same things they could do in hundreds of other games without all the blockchain baggage. Like, nothing about NFT games ever really made any sense from a marketing or consumer perspective. It was just to say that it was involved in crypto. But NFTs, it's just an abject failure. There is no future in it. At number 5, Tetris is finally finished. Some madman finally beat Tetris. These old school arcade games can't be beaten in any conventional metric. When you get to the end, they just restart and you play again. But eventually you can get a kill screen, which is the point where the game no longer functions. For Tetris, it was believed for years that actually reaching this kill screen was not humanly possible because the reaction time and the speed of the falling blocks was just too much. But in recent years, there's been massive innovation in the Tetris community and some insane strategies that allow people to keep playing the game even when blocks are falling so fast it's nearly impossible to keep up. The most impressive of these techniques is rolling, where players would rhythmically roll their fingers under the bottom of the NES controller. Seriously, it has to be seen to be believed. It sounds ridiculous, but it does actually work. Usually with speedrunning, you see people come up with in-game solutions to technical problems, but with Tetris players, they're coming with entire new hand movement tricks to keep up the ridiculous speeds of the game at high levels. The person to finally reach the finish line and beat Tetris was, and I kid you not, a 13-year-old kid with the username Blue Scooty. The idea of some 13-year-old playing an NES in 2024, I mean, that's silly enough as it is. But, I mean, considering this was a 13-year-old kid who was hardly the only one trying to reach the mythical kill screen, but was the first to be there, that deserves some serious accolades. I mean, for decades, no one even believed this could happen, and this kid wasn't alive for most of that time. At number 4, Spec Ops: The Line was delisted. Another year, another high-profile game delisting. This is hardly the only game that got pulled from the online storefronts this year. There's an entire online website dedicated to tracking games getting delisted, but it's one of the most notable, to say the least. It probably got delisted because of music licenses, which is the silent killer of the 7th generation of games. I barely even remember any of the licensed music on this thing, but all it takes is one, and you better believe 2K isn't going to fork over any cash to keep the music. They won't even do that for Grand Theft Auto games, so there's no way in hell they're doing it with Spec Ops: The Line, which sucks because it's a really interesting game. I'm not sure I would call it great, but it's a game that over the years I've grown to respect just for doing something very different. It's a thing that starts off like your standard third-person hoorah military shooter, and by the end, it's gone full-blown psychological horror. That's interesting, and no other game has quite managed to do what this game has done on scale. It's messy, no doubt, but the audacity on display is commendable, and it never falls apart, per se. It's one of those games that should be played, or at least be out there for people to play, so it really sucks it got delisted. Hopefully it'll get a second chance at life at some point, because it's a game that needs to be played, even if only for you to form an opinion on what the hell is happening here. At number 3, it's Suicide Squad, which lived and died back in 2024, which, holy hell, it's weird to say that. We live in the future, don't we? Well, Suicide Squad killed the Justice League doesn't. But in all seriousness, with how big of problems we've seen this year, the failure of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League almost looks quaint. It was supposed to be a forever game, a live service experience that would extend far beyond the initial launch of the game, but just weeks after launch, the writing was already on the walls. The game had soft sales. WB claims that they lost $200 million on it. That's pretty bad. It wasn't really if the game is shutting down, just when. And to Rocksteady's credit, the game did at least keep going long enough to fulfill their pre-release promises and all the new characters in all their declining levels of interest, blah, blah, blah. So when they announced in early December the final game update would be in January, I don't think anybody was shocked or even particularly upset. Anyone with any interest in the game knew it was coming. Did the game deserve better? Arguably, I might say maybe. Even with all the live service junk, there was a little bit of that old Rocksteady magic buried in there. But the stuff they added into the game wasn't that exciting, and, you know, I'll go ahead and say this. If it wasn't a live service game, this game would have had so much more of a chance. because they'd be developing it without the live service junk in mind, and the stuff that was good would be allowed to be, it would probably be, backed up with stuff that Rocksteady does right, rather than, live service crap that they clearly don't know what they're doing with. The stuff they added in was just the same repetitive live service slop tasks we're all getting sick of doing, and a few unsightly cutscenes stitched in to kind of justify new characters. I don't really know what the hell any of this mattered for. The whole post-game support didn't feel substantial as it needed to be. Didn't live up to the quality of presentation the base game had, which not great. It was free and the new characters were fun to play as, but it needed more. Some story progression, new missions. I mean, something that made it feel like more of a game rather than more of the game that we got, Unless that final update does something totally drastic, it's never going to be finished. The heroes everybody said would definitely come back in the future seasons, they'll stay dead and nobody will care. Because, man, things move fast in this industry. Suicide Squad kind of feels like it happened 1,000 years ago at this point. Who even cares? I mean, at least they're not closing the servers down so people who want to play the game can. That's more than can be said about a lot of games on this list. Number 2, Netflix shuts down a AAA studio before it even announced a game. For years, everybody was getting into video games, thinking it would make a quick buck. Amazon's been floundering, trying to get a foothold in the industry for years, and Netflix's efforts haven't been a lot better. In 2022, Netflix started building the Southern California game studio. Didn't have an official name, and they were bringing in big guns like Overwatch producer Chaco Sonny and Joseph Staten, the creative director at Bungie and 343. They also brought in the art director from Sony Santa Monica. I mean, there were big names in the industry, and that signaled Netflix was getting ready to step into the AAA games market. Team Blue, as they were called internally, they were doing big things. Netflix announced they were going to work on a brand new AAA multi-platform game and original IP, and then nothing. Fast forward 2 years, and all 3 of the guys I mentioned are no longer with the company, and the studio's been dissolved. We know absolutely nothing about the game that was going to be. No name, no concept art, no nothing. This isn't even the only big studio fronted by an industry veteran to close this year with nothing announced. Mass Effect director David Gator, his new studio Humanoid Origin also shut down in 2024 without releasing a game. I mean, they at least had some kind of concept art. That's something, I guess, though. And at number 1, Concord, which lived and died in 2024. In fact, like a few weeks in 2024. 8 years in development, 2 weeks playable. That's Concord in a nutshell. A $250 million disaster that is by far the highest profile death of 2024. It's a weird thing because the game wasn't terrible. Like, you read anything about it and you assume it's a massive day before style disaster, but it's not. It's just a mediocre, maybe kind of subpar hero shooter that nobody wanted to play. Nothing particularly appealing about it. There were a couple of things that were cool, but they were certainly nothing that outweighed the lame crap that nobody cared about or didn't want. And if it wasn't the central pillar to PlayStation's entire online ambitions and didn't cost $200+ million to make, it probably would have just been another forgettable online multiplayer shooter. Like, games like these come out and bomb all the time. Concord was supposed to be something special. At least someone at Sony saw something in this thing. Somebody thought that this, a half-baked Guardians of the Galaxy panache, was going to be the next big thing. It wasn't. Sales were abysmal. Nobody cared. Sony shut down the game after 2 weeks. 2 weeks of being online. The immediate assumption was that they were pulling a multiverses. They were stopping the game temporarily to retool, lay low for a few months, and relaunch as a free-to-play. But that didn't happen. Instead, Sony shut down the game permanently and closed the studio they'd only just acquired the previous year, along with a few other studios like Neon Koi, who yet again didn't even get the chance to announce a game. But hey, at least Concord lives on as a secret level episode, right? I mean, the game didn't even last long enough for the advertisement disguised as an episode of a TV show to push it. Like, it's all got to go down as one of Sony's most public and avoidable blunders. The cluelessness from every level of this is astounding. And I do have a quick bonus for you. All the other game studio closures. More than 21 notable game studios closed in 2024. And while I covered a lot of them, there's so many more I didn't get a chance to mention. The biggest names were, of course, the 4 from Bethesda, Arcane Austin, Alpha Dog, Roundhouse Games, and the Hi-Fi Rush developer Tango Gameworks. Arcane Austin and Tango hit hard. Sure, Arcane Austin's last game was a disappointing Redfall, and thankfully the other Arcane wing is still in existence. But Arcane Austin made Prey, which is one of the best immersive sims ever, and Tango Gameworks was a memorable studio as well. With the Evil Within games, especially 2, they were awesome games. Tango was revived at Crafton, so that's good, but not a lot of these studios were lucky. Piranha Bytes The devs behind the Gothic games really suffered in 2024. Well, Oka Studio, the guys behind Vision of Mana, they were shut down before the game was even out. Like, pour one out for all these studios. You're gone, but not forgotten. At least some of you. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.